Well, how we doing, local church? Wow, today we were supposed to plant a church, but we didn't. And so as I sit here talking about this, I feel like I should be setting up lights. I should be praying over chairs. I should be walking around a banquet hall, expecting that within a matter of hours, this entire room would be transformed from a banquet hall into an altar for the presence of God. But I'm not, and we're not. And unfortunately, today, due to snow, we had to cancel. Now, today's been on my calendar for over a year. Literally, I got a notification on my phone this morning. It's a countdown app that I have that said, "Congratulations, local church completed its launch." And I was like, well, that's ironic. But man, we planned this for over a year. We've had hours and hours and days of working, preparing for this morning. Yet I'm here on January 12th, 2025, sitting in my office with a Tennessee Vols blanket that's been on me all morning because I'm freezing cold, a lukewarm cup of coffee, and a space heater at my feet to keep me warm. That's what's happening around me right now. Now, when we started planting, people told me that launching in January was a bad idea. Now, if you could think about this, in East Tennessee, we get a lot of bad weather, get a lot of sickness. And so men who planted 20-plus churches told me to move faster, launch bigger, drive harder and quicker to the start of the race. Yet here we are in January, not having church. Now, for many of us, this feels like a setback. And, in a way, it's kind of felt like a setback to me as well, especially in the middle of the week. Before I accepted the forecast. But I've experienced a lot of ministry setbacks before, a lot of them. And more often than not, the most significant toll was not the event, program, or a ministry failure. It was the pressure that I placed on myself to make those events, ministries, and programs succeed. In a lot of ways, I wanted to make God's church work. I wanted to ensure that souls were saved. I wanted to force the move of God to happen into my calendar slot. I wanted to make sure that the spontaneous baptism happened as we had planned. Okay, yeah, see how the irony there? You see the foolishness of that? Now, they say that pressure creates diamonds. And while that's true geologically, with the study of rocks, it could not be any less accurate for ecclesiology when it comes to the study of church, because the pressure that creates diamonds in the ground often creates dysfunction in the church. My wife told me this weekend, she said, I remember 2017, Landon. In fact, Haley texted Leanna this week, and she just said, "How's Landon doing with the cancellation?" Because, a lot of people remember 2017 Landon. Luckily, there's only like a few of you all who knew 2017 Landon. But the 2017 Landon she speaks of was a Landon who had to make everything work. I believe that with enough planning, systems, and strategies and physical hard work, I could somehow mitigate all risk and somehow achieve a spiritual result. And I thought I could guarantee success if I just worked hard enough and followed the right formula. But God often had different plans. And it seems that God has a different plan today. But for me, this time, this snow day hits a little bit different. Why? Because I think this time I'm different. I'm not 2017 Landon. Therefore, today, there is very little pressure. I don't feel the pressure today to launch a church. Honestly, guys, I don't feel the pressure today. I don't feel the weight of making a mentor or another pastor proud. I don't feel the regret of not launching in September when it was warm and sunny and everybody wanted to get out. The only pressure I currently feel today was, as I wrote this, the whining of my loyal Australian shepherd asking me to let him out of the office so he could go pee. Literally, that's the only pressure I feel. I don't feel the pressure to build God's church. I don't even have the tools required to do so. But I do have a God who promises to build his church. And if the gates of hell will not prevail against it, then I'm sure a snow day and the alterations to a perfectly planned launch calendar that's curated so well will be fine too. Now, remember what the author of Proverbs says. It says this in Proverbs 16:9. It says, the heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Okay? So I want us to keep that in mind, this idea that man plans, but God directs. So actually, let's read the entire passage here. Proverbs 16 says this. We'll read the first 9 verses. It says, the plans of heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. All the ways of the man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs his spirit. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. The Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble. Everyone who is arrogant in his heart is an abomination to the Lord, but be assured he will not go unpunished. By steadfast love and faithfulness, iniquity is atoned for, and by the fear of the Lord, one turns away from evil. When a man's way please the Lord, he makes even his enemies be at peace with him. Better is with a little righteousness with great revenues than great revenues with injustice. The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. There's 3 things we see in this passage. The first thing is this, is that number 1, man plans. We have planned this launch. We have gathered resources. We have fundraised. We have created setup and teardown processes. We have scheduled volunteers. We have built teams. We've done everything we can do on our from our part, from our standpoint, to make sure that January 12th happened, that a gospel preaching, Bible believing new church was built and launched in a community so that we could help people love God and make disciples in this local community. We have planned this out. But what do we know? We are not sovereign. Why do we know that? Because number 2, God directs. Now, he has directed our church today. Every decision, every speck of dust, like it says in Psalms, even as the lot is cast into the hat, so is every decision is from the Lord. So we know that the snow that sits on the ground, from the medical emergency you might have had last month, to what your family is dealing with, to the trials that you're walking through the amount of money that's in your bank account today, every bit of that is under the sovereign hand of a loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God. Now, here's the deal. When he moves, we don't know why he does it. We don't know what his plan is, but we know that he is directing. He is not aloof. He is not standoffish. He is not far away. He is not just getting involved when he needs to. He is sovereign, and he is directing, which means for some reason he directed that today would not be the launch Sunday of local church. That was his direction. Now, that could seem really frustrating. It could seem like a bummer. It could seem like a setback. But if man plans and God directs, that actually means it's a good thing. Why? Because of number 3 we see from this passage is that God establishes. Okay? Here's the thing. I don't want to build a church that God didn't establish. I don't want to be the pastor of a church that a pioneer team established. I don't want to do that. Why? Because if God does not establish it, then we are built on sinking sand. But if he establishes things upon the rock. So God directs, which is good news if God's establishing. Now we can direct, we can plan if we want a man-built church. But I don't want a man-built church. We've seen the best church that man can build. We want what God can build. So I'll close with this story, okay? And I'll share this story again in March with our church. But I want to share it with you today because it's been fresh on my heart. Let me take you back to 1857. In 1857, this is pre-Civil War, so the country was very tense at this point in time. In 1857, New York, which used to be New Amsterdam, had the Dutch Reformed Church. The Dutch Reformed Church in New Amsterdam was, in New York City, what we know as New York City now, was a very popular church. But as the city began to change, the Dutch Reformed Church began to move out into the suburbs like many people do. That's why they call it the inner city. The inner city happens because everybody moves to the outskirts of the city. So the Dutch Reformed Church moves, but they still have their building, okay? They wanted to use their building as a mission, so they sent a man named Jeremiah Lanphier. Now, Jeremiah Lanphier, he was a regular man. He was a tradesman. He was not a paid professional minister. He had no seminary degree, no formal training. He was just a man who felt called to do what God had called him to do, and so his church sent him into New York City on Fulton Street, which is the middle of the financial district today, to start a mission. So he planned, like we had, he passed out flyers he wasn't planting a church, but he was starting a new prayer meeting for businessmen. So this was a very male-dominated society. This was a lot of businessmen going back and forth on Fulton Street. And so he spent weeks, maybe even months, planning this prayer meeting. And he sent out a card. He said, prayer meeting for businessmen. It was going to happen on September 23rd, 1857. Come and pray for spiritual renewal and revival. So he goes and he spends all this time preparing for this prayer meeting, and he shows up for the prayer meeting, and like so many prayer meetings, the way that they begin, he shows up and no one came. No one was there. Man, you could imagine that, like we're feeling today, he was probably very, very discouraged. Now, the church at this point in time was divided denominationally. The attendance was in decline. This was a pre-Civil War environment, so everything was very, very tense. And so there at about 12 o'clock, he sees nobody's around. He's discouraged, but you know what he's going to do? He's going to hit his knees and pray. So on September 23rd, that's what Jeremiah Lanford did. He prayed. Well, 30 minutes had passed in the prayer meeting, and Lanford heard footsteps. And all of a sudden, 6 men walked into a room to pray. And as it is with most revivals, not many people know about who these faithful men were, but we know that there were 6 faithful men. Now, these men showed up, and at week 1, there were 6 men, and at week 2, there were 20 men, and at week 3, there were 40 men, and they made the decision going into the fall that they were going to move their weekly businessmen's prayer meeting to become a daily businessmen's prayer meeting. Well, on that week, when they decided to make it a daily prayer meeting, the stock market crashed in the United States in 1857. On October 14th, 1857, the banks suspended their operations, and the financial crisis gripped Fulton Street and the nation at large. And as businesses were closed and fortunes were lost, people turned to pray. And all of a sudden, a daily prayer meeting became packed. And the revival's fire spread to other churches, so much so that in many places it was constantly quiet during the lunch hour. Businesses began to let their men leave early to go to pray, and the police force was even suspended in some areas due to a lack of crime. The city had been gripped by the presence of God happening at these prayer meetings. The prayer meeting that no one showed up to at the beginning. Estimates even at one point record that there were 40,000 people in New York City gathering to pray. The fire could not be contained to NYC. It spread to Chicago and Cleveland and Los Angeles and even to Europe. Church historians record that in the height of this revival, there were 20,000 people putting their faith in Jesus every single Sunday. It had been called now the Businessmen's Prayer Revival that led to 1 million people coming to faith in Jesus in America. Never before or since has America seen that sort of revival and a spiritual awakening. But what preceded it? Well, it was really, really simple. 6 men. There were 6 men who picked up a flyer. There were 6 men who decided to show up. There were 6 men who gave up their lunch. There were 6 men who substituted prayer for productivity. There were 6 men who decided to seek God. There were 6 men who started a prayer movement that led to the salvation of 1 million people and planted the seeds for revival in Ulster in Ireland in 1859 and led to what was known as the Third Great Awakening. E.M. Bounds once said this: "The church is looking for better methods, but God is looking for better men." See, the church is looking for better days to start. The church is looking for the right launch date. What the church is looking for how do we make sure that we hit our momentum? How do we get critical mass? But God is looking for men and women who seek after him. What if we don't need better strategies and better systems and a better planned out launch date or better budgets, but better men and women who are willing to get up and seek the Lord? So I'm going to challenge you today to find a few good men and a few good women, and a few good maybe even teenagers who are willing this week to say, God's given us an extra week to sit up, to hit our knees, and to call out for revival to take place here in our nation. For some reason, God said, not this week, next week. Okay, well, maybe that gives us 7 more days to prepare the ground. Will you be one of them? All it takes is a few good men. All it takes is a few good women. All it takes is a few good teenagers. All it takes is a church willing to seek after him. So are we willing to do so? So what do? Well, we do what Jeremiah Lanfear said and exactly what Proverbs says. It says, commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. Now, what does that word commit mean? Does it mean that we need to dedicate it unto him? Do we need to put God's name on? What does that mean? Well, in the Hebrew, the word commit literally means to roll upon. Like you're rolling upon a heavy load into the bed of a truck. It means that we transfer our work, our desires, our hopes, and our dreams, and we roll it upon God. Because we've planned, we roll upon our plans because God now can direct it. We put it in the bed of his truck and rolled upon him. And now, because the load, the work, the plow is in the back of his truck, it's loaded upon him, we now can see our plans established. Why? Because he's directing how to actually establish them. So I am calling upon us to roll upon our cares. Roll upon our needs, roll upon our hopes, roll upon our expectations, and place it upon a God who can actually establish. How do we do this? We trust, we pray, we seek, we fast, knowing that this burden is too big to carry. So we need to cast all of our cares upon him because he cares for you. He cares for you this morning. He cares for local church. He cares that disciples are made. He cares that our people are stirred up to worship him. He cares. So roll upon our cares upon him. So I want to challenge you. Yes, show up Sunday ready, but I want to challenge you, show up to the prayer room Thursday morning, 7 a.m. This is a corporate time for us to roll our cares upon him. It's not how many people attend church on Sunday morning that shows what God's doing. It's about how many people are getting up early to seek after him. Let's do that. Come rain or shine next Sunday, okay? No matter what happens this week, let's commit our work to see God establish his plans.